Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How Can the Praxis Framework Offer a Valuable Solution to P3 Management? My name's Etty, I'm the Content Marketing Executive at ILX. We'll just give it a couple more minutes just to see if a few more people join us, and then I'll hand over to Andy, who will be taking you through the main sort of portion of the webinar today.
I should give it 2 minutes, Etty, and then we'll make a start.
Yeah, it's fine. I'll run through the housekeeping bits now, and then I'm sure people will gradually kind of join as we're working through those. So the first bit is just, you'll notice that you're all on mute. If you could just remain on mute throughout the session, that would be great. If you do have any questions, there's a little question box. So if you can just type those in there, and then if they're sort of technical questions, you can't hear something, you can't see something, then I'll answer them as we're going along. But if not, then we've got a Q&A portion sort of scheduled at the end of the session. So we'll talk through those questions at the end. Secondly, the webinar is recorded. That's kind of the most common question we tend to get. So you'll receive a follow-up email from us later this week. That'll include a link to the YouTube recording, and then you can kind of watch it back or forward it on to any other colleagues if you think they might find it useful as well. We'd also just like to say, give us a follow on social media. We do run a lot of these sort of webinar sessions, and we promote all of those on our social channels, so LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram, as well as a lot of other information about our courses that you can find over on there. So we're just at ILX Group on those channels. And finally, today's session is going to be about 45 minutes. And then, as I said, we've got a session booked in for the Q&A at the end. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Andy, who's going to take you through the main part of the webinar. And yeah.
Hello, everybody. Andy West, Senior Training Consultant here at ILX. Welcome along. As you can see from the title, How Can Praxis Framework Offer a Valuable Solution to the P3 Manager? We're going to look at what Praxis is and how it works and some of the elements within it. First thing just to say about Praxis is it's a free, community-driven resource that anyone can use as you're looking at projects and programs and portfolios as you go through. Created by Adrian Dooley as a kind of support tool, kind of integration of lots of other things that have gone before. But the important thing about this being community driven is if you're using the Praxis framework, share your experience, your guidance, feed back into it and become part of that community as you go through. And very much like that kind of open source material. So as we go through, I'll talk about what it is and all those other good things. But if you're interested in using it, have a look at the website. Details will appear later on in the webinar. So really the purpose of this is to look at the Praxis framework. What is it? What does it do? I'll have a look at the structure and the content of it. I'll compare it to some development methods. How do they link into Praxis? I'll compare it to things like PRINCE2 and the APM qualifications. What's the basis there? Some kind of common comparisons. I'll also have a quick look at kind of the course structures and exams you might get from it and who might get some value from the Praxis framework as we go through. So those are the sorts of things we're going to go and have a look at. Starting point for this is whenever you look at project management, we're always looking at kind of best practice guidance. Now, what's the way of doing these things? What should we really know? And so knowledge, best practice, what should you know about project management, program management, portfolio management? And often these are in bodies of knowledge. PMBOK and the APM's body of knowledge being the classic examples of those. Method. How am I going to do this? And so look at things like PRINCE2. MSP for programs, management portfolios. What they give you is a life cycle. These are the steps. This is what you should be doing. Capability maturity model. How well am I doing? What do I know? And if you look at all of the ongoing professional competence models, they're based around that kind of capability maturity. How good am I at this? That's competence framework. Right? Capability is how good is my organization at this? I'll get the two confused. So the capability maturity model is how good are we as an organization at this? And so you could look at the APM's model for this, similarly to the APM model for the competency framework. How good am I? And if you look at all of the higher kind of qualifications and professional bodies, they're looking at competency. Can you demonstrate your skill in doing these sorts of things? And so the purpose of Praxis is to offer all of these things in a unified package, and not just for projects, but project programs and portfolios. So to look at those sorts of things. And so, if like the central part of this is a body of knowledge, very similar to the APM's body of knowledge. It is an online resource, so you actually go in there and have a look at those sorts of things. You can react to what's on there. And that'll feed into then the method, the life cycle. Where am I in the project and what do I do? It provides the backbone for the kind of competence model. What do I know? How well do I know these things as an individual? Where am I in terms of competence? And what, therefore, do I need to look at if I want to improve myself? And then maturity is about the organization. As an organization, how mature are we in projects, programs, and portfolios? What are we good at? What are we not so good at? Where are the areas for development as an organization? And so Praxis is bringing all of these together. And when you look at the framework, it's got application against all of these sorts of areas. I'm going to focus this afternoon on the knowledge and the method bit. It's the kind of primary things that often people look at project manager and go, I want a qualification about these sorts of things. I'll mention maturity and competence fairly briefly. Have a look at what's going on. So in terms of capability as an organization, incomplete. We don't really have a great deal of capability as an organization. We're performing these things. So there are some processes that we have, and we're doing some of those. Manage, we're getting better at doing it as we go through. Define, we have defined processes. This is how we're going to make it as we go through. And of course, the important element here is, how well in terms of maturity are we doing these? So we've got some kind of initial one. Level 5 in terms of maturity, optimizing it. We have a process. We have a standard way of doing this. And we review and we learn from it, and we're improving as we go through. And clearly that organizational maturity is hugely important to make sure that we understand, where do we as an organization start to improve? What are the sorts of things we need to have a look at? I'll leave those to one side because those are huge areas in their own right, often about personal organizational development. What I wanted to focus on was that kind of the knowledge and the method bit to compare it to some of those elements. So the knowledge core. It's a body of knowledge. It's actually an online body of knowledge, which makes it very useful because you can type anything I want to have a look at. So hugely useful when you're trying to research those kind of elements. It's broken into kind of contextual and management functions. So what are the things that fit in the context of projects, programs, and portfolios, and what are the things we need to do within managing those particular areas? And so it's about understanding sometimes the organizational context, the environmental context, that sort of analysis that goes on. And how might these impact how we do project programs and portfolios? And of course, the management functions are the things we do like risk management and change control and configuration and information management. How do I do all those kind of elements? What Praxis looks at are things like delivery functions. So scope, schedule, finance, risk, and so on. And for each of these, there'll be a kind of planning. How do I intend to do this in the life of this particular project? And to initiate it and kick it off, and then there'll be some specific steps about that particular function as we go through. So for things like scope, you'll be talking about identifying the size of the scope. What's the final output? Defining it, things like the breakdown structures. And then managing it, picking up things like change control and configuration management. So it starts to pick those kind of functions up as we go through and starts to allow us to understand what's really going to happen as we deal with these. And then we start to look across the kind of areas that we're trying to manage as we look at this. So we start to think about how do we do planning? How do we put a business case together? how do we control the project? How do we control information? The right organization structure. And the idea is that the kind of iterative functions work with the fundamental components of delivery. So how do I deliver the project, and how are these functions going to help me? Do I understand about the tools of planning, the content and purpose of a business case, how to monitor and control in a project? And it's trying to link these things together in a kind of structured manner that builds our body of knowledge. Now, I can go into a lot of the detail of this, but it would be similar to lots of things that you would see in lots of other places. So if you look at things like risk, that you need to identify the risks, you need to assess the risks in some way. You need to then plan what you're going to do and then implement those things. And that will feed into the planning process when we start to look at planning the project. How am I going to link those things together? What kind of mitigation actions am I going to put into here? So these would link into a lot of things that you may have bumped into as project managers or have heard about in project management terms as you go through. Similarly, when we start to look at things like resource, planning resource. So from the activities that we're going to undertake, what resource types do I need? And that will bump into the organizational structure. Have I identified all of the different resource types that I want? It's then about allocating those to the right tasks in our plan as we go through, monitor their usage, and kind of controlling what are they doing, when are they doing it, are performing as we want it, which allows us then to use the resources and pass them back when they're no longer needed. So it's trying to link all of these things together in terms of the content. And clearly, if you're looking at a course focusing on the knowledge of these, we'll be looking at these components of delivery and the interpretive functions to make sure we're linking all of those things together as we go through. How do I make all of these elements fit? So there is a lot to study, but similar to things like the body of knowledge, when you look at the APMs one and you look at all the elements within the fundamental qualification or in the project management qualification, it's trying to understand all the things you do as a project manager, all the things you need to be aware of as you go through. And today probably isn't the day for going through all of that sort of detail. But suffice to say is that there's a lot of content in here, like there is in all project management courses, about what are the core things we need to understand. What is it? What's the subject matter that I need to understand? What am I going to do as a project manager? The critical thing, and often this is what people do, is, well, when do I do it? How do I? Where in the project do I do all of these sorts of things? And that's very much the purpose of the method, the framework. Now, in the Praxis Framework, projects, programs, and portfolios are basically about different levels of complexity. So if you have simple things to do, then the process model you use will be the project process model. It is about delivering, work is often meeting time, cost, and quality, and the other performance criteria of your project. And particularly in the Praxis Framework, what we look at is time, cost, and scope. Quality is inherent in what we're going to deliver. If we don't achieve quality, then we're not delivering something that our customer actually wants. And so we look at time, cost, and scope to make sure we're delivering all the things that customers asked for. And of course, this fits neatly with both linear type development and agile type development. We must achieve what the customer actually wants, otherwise they're never going to use it. But it's whether the scope is fixed and we're estimating cost and time, or whether they're fixing cost and time and we're estimating the scope we're going to do. Both of those fit quite happily, and I'll show you that in a sec. Programs load complexity up. It's a bigger kind of delivery, and therefore it needs a slightly bigger framework. And it's, how do I make it work? What's things go in here? And so when we start to look at projects and programs within the Praxis Framework, the life cycle that we're going to follow, the development path we're going to follow, is very similar. Portfolios are doing complexity above all of that, and it's much more about the totality of change in the organization and balancing that with keeping business as usual going. And so it's that degree of complexity. It's about the whole organization and all the things that we need to organize to keep that balance between change and business as usual, continuity. So there are kind of two life cycles we look at, one which covers project programs and the other looks at portfolios. There is a slight variation for the programs because, of course, we're dealing with tranches and there may be multiple tranches we go through. And I'll show you the slight variation there in a second. Simplistically, we start with the life cycle, the framework for a project. It's a way of getting from an idea, a requirement, to an output. And the general phases are identification, definition, delivery, closure. Now, this is a project management life cycle. And clearly the purpose of the identification step is this a worthwhile idea? Should we develop this? It's more about validating the value, the viability of this, than necessarily anything technical. Similarly, definition. Given what we know so far, how we're going to deliver this project. What's the right approach to take? Delivery is where we do the work of the project. And then closure is shutting it down, doing the final reviews, archiving all the useful documentation. And it says final output here. Now, this, of course, could be made up of a whole series of deliverables that have come through and we add them together at the very end, or it comes out in one big lump, depending on the nature of the delivery process. And so when you look at Praxis, think about project management. What do I need to manage the project? And how do I manage what's going on in the delivery phase, rather than is there a different life cycle for, agile or for linear projects? The answer is, well, no. It's what happens in delivery that makes that difference here. So when we start to look at Praxis, if I develop methods here, is it Scrum, is it Agile, is it linear, is it waterfall? Praxis is about managing the project. It's about the role of the project manager in managing this particular piece of work from beginning to end. It's going to focus on the project manager and their responsibilities, the skills that they need. And that comes back to the knowledge and all the things we need to understand as project managers to make this work. And part of that will be different development methods. The development method is, what's the right way of building this output? If your output is easily predictable, as is the delivery process, a more linear kind of waterfall method might be perfectly appropriate. If it needs to be much more adaptive because the customer's requirements are less defined or much more likely to change over the life of the project, given the environment, then actually a different sort of development method might be much more appropriate. And so when you look at this, you can put the Praxis lifecycle in place, and within delivery, it does some kind of typical linear technical steps. And we do a specification based on what's been defined so far. What are the requirements of the customer? We do a design based on that, and based on that we build the thing and we test it, and commissioning is kind of transferring data or doing the training or whatever else necessary, the maintenance instructions, and there's one big live output at the end. And we go through the closure process, and there's that final output. Marvelous. Equally, in definition, we're going to realize our customer doesn't really know what they want. There's going to be lots of changes. We need to embrace change. And therefore, our delivery phase of this is a series of time boxes or sprints. And clearly, the project will be defined by A, the length of a time box, and B, the number of time boxes we're going to go and do. And at the end of each time box, there is a series of outputs. As we add those outputs together, and they're going live at the end of each time box, we achieve our final output. So the Praxis lifecycle works equally well for both circumstances. The important thing for the project manager is, in identification and definition, what does our customer know? What does our client want? How good are those requirements? What sort of product is? What's the most appropriate way of delivering it? And it's to make all those sorts of decisions. And in the definition phase, define the most appropriate way of delivering this particular solution, the most appropriate way of delivering this particular project. It's still delivery. It's still about monitoring control as a project manager. It's about delegating the work and getting agreement and commitment from your team. But it's about using that team to go, what's the best way of doing this? And so the life cycle is kind of for the project manager. What we need to make sure is we actually talk to our team and understand what's the best way of developing the product. And we can do both or either. And as has been talked about on LinkedIn over the last month at least, agile and linear, is it really binary? Is it one or the other? Or what about degrees of agility? How agile can we be? And it is sometimes about what's appropriate. And again, that's part of the definition phase, is to understand those sort of things and go, this is the appropriate way of doing it. So whether you're using kind of more agile methods or less agile methods, Praxis gives you a life cycle where you can manage that as a project manager. It's about what do I do as a project manager not what do I do as the development team. And so it is about managing those relationships. It's about understanding how those two things work. So that's the general life cycle. A variation of this is the program life cycle. And if you look, it still says idea, big idea. It's a program. It's much more complex. Identification, is this worthwhile? How are we going to do it? Definition, how are we going to do this? It then talks about delivery tranches. And the idea of a tranche is just a slice of the program. Each tranche made up of a number of projects. And so we will have tranches. Now, the end of each tranche is an important review point. Notice here the gates. Often called an island of stability. If the program is cancelled at this point, it doesn't unravel all the way back to leave you nothing. This is a stable amount of change. And so, again, where you put those tranches depends on the nature of your program. Where's a good place? Where are those stable points that if we decide to cancel it, it's no longer worthwhile doing, the whole thing doesn't unravel. Goes through the same kind of process. We got that kind of delivery bit, and we got closure. Now, there's an interesting question on a recent Praxis webinar that says, is therefore change management, the hearts and minds, getting people ready to deal with the ongoing and benefit realization, best handled at program level? And the answer to that is depends on your maturity. It depends on how good you are as an organization at both of those things. In projects, we always talk about change control. Are we changing what the customer wants? Are we doing something in a linear project, clearly asking for more money, extending the date and the budget of the project as we go through? In a more iterative and a more agile project, then if you want to put something in, taking something out. But the idea is that we're going to deal with changing what we're delivering. It's change control. Now, change management causes hearts and minds. Because the important thing here is that when we hand over an output, we want people to actually go and use it. And if we haven't done that, then it doesn't matter how good the thing is we've created, whether it's been in an agile or a more linear way, they go look at it and go, that's not what I needed. Within a program, clearly, we can use roles like business change managers, people who represent areas of the business who will be helping us get their bit of the business ready, because it's a major change, and therefore investing in these sorts of roles is kind of crucial. However, in a project, we have to enable change management. We have to do stakeholder engagement. We've got to talk to people and say, are you ready for this? What's going on? Are we engaging? Are we answering people's objections? And so change management is one of those complementary skills of the project manager. Remember, you're here to manage the project. You're not there as a technical manager. That's the delivery bit. And so the answer is here, well, if your project is part of a program, you may find that change management and benefit realization is being done as part of your program, and you will feed into that as the project manager. But if you have a standalone project, then as a project manager, you need to be engaging with those users. You need to be doing a lot more of the stakeholder engagement, winning over hearts and minds, dealing with their objections, minimizing their resistance. Resentment? Interesting. And therefore, when you hand it over, people accept and start using it. And of course, if you're working in a more agile project and you're doing a release at the end of every time box, every sprint, you need to do this early. You need to start engaging people so that after that first time box, they're ready for delivery. And so the role of the project manager is not that technical role. It's that interface between the business and the project. It's managing that interface and making sure that both parties have got all the things they need. And therefore, yes, you should be doing it in a project if nobody else is doing it. If you're not part of a program and there's no one allocated to do so, you need to make sure it's happening. And of course, linked to your business case, planning benefit realization, having some kind of realization plan that you hand over to make sure there's an understanding, an acceptance that this has got to be monitored and managed. If we don't do either of those things, you can deliver what you like and no one's going to use it because they weren't prepared and no one's going to think about measuring the benefits afterwards, which kind of defeats the point of trying to do some kind of change. And so there's a degree of flexibility in here depending on what you're going to go and do. Clearly, the Praxis lifecycle identifies these because it's a significant change and therefore we'll need to put some resources against it. We may need, a change management specialist. We may need some benefit specialists. It's the degree of complexity we're talking about here that makes it from being a project to a program. The skills and the knowledge, those things still need to be done. Otherwise, we hand things over and people say no. They give us a structure for managing projects and programs. And you see there's a kind of broad link between them. It's kind of start, middle, and end. But 2 steps, is it worthwhile and how are we going to do it? All projects need to be closed down so we can do that final evaluation. If you've been doing an evaluation at the end of every time box, end of every stage, there's still a need to do that kind of view of hindsight at the end of the project or at the end of a program. What have we learned? What have we improved? What do we recommend that future projects and programs do? Where are we going to put all the documentation? What do we archive? Where do we archive it? How long do we keep it for? All of these things still need to be done. And so closure has to happen because you've come to the end of a piece of work. And of course, it allows people to find the things you've done and find out and ask questions about what and why and how and are you sure? All those important things that people might ask afterwards. And so that's the purpose of that. It's to do with all those kind of elements. And clearly, thank you, team. If we look at the portfolio, it's slightly different life cycle because it's about initiating. It's about almost on a yearly basis at the top of the organization, taking the strategy and converting it into action. What is it we're going to go and do? And so it talks about definition. What is the corporate strategy? Where are we going? What objectives do we have? Projects, programs, what sort of things do we need? How many can we run whilst maintaining business as usual at the same time? Prioritizing those so that we can use our limited resources in the right places. And this is always one of the most critical things about portfolio management is balancing change against business as usual. And this is a layer of complexity that as an organization you need to consider. Do we have a very stable kind of year? Are there peaks and troughs in customer demand, in customer activity? And if the answer is yes, balancing is about adjusting. When's a good time to do projects and programs, to launch these changes? When's not? So think very simply, if we talk about a retail industry, the last 2 to 3 months, possibly not a good time to launch lots of changes onto your organization because business as usual, it is at its maximum kind of activity point. And therefore, we might keep our project developing in the back. We're not going to change things. It's a bit too busy for that. In the next few weeks, we might see that peak start to come down again. The January sales are over, and therefore it's time to start thinking about implementing some changes, improving things for the next time. We have a peak. Can we do them more better? Can we learn lessons from these and do it better as you go through? And so the portfolio is constantly doing these 4 things round through the year. It's looking at the progress of projects and programs and kind of going, do we need to accelerate or decelerate? Do we need to do more changes? Actually, there's a peak coming of some business as usual work. Do we need to slow things up, give them a bit more breathing space? And of course, what that's trying to do is enable the delivery of projects and programs to enable the changes you go through. What we're trying to make sure is that all the things we're doing balance for the organization and we adjust the portfolio and the prioritization as we learn more, as the world spins and other things happen as you go through. So in terms of the method, projects and programs are very similar. Portfolio is a bit more repetitive, has a bit more of that kind of iterative process going on. Let's review this as we go through. It's about maintaining that control at the highest level of the organization, at the most complex, so we can see what's actually going on. All of the knowledge elements kind of underpin this delivery to make sure we've got the right things happening at the right time, that we're engaging the right kind of skills, the right kind of resources. If we're to compare Praxis with other well-known things going on, particularly here in the UK, PRINCE2 and MSP are owned by Axelos, Projects and Controlled Environments 2, and Managing Accessible Programs. They're designed to integrate, but they have a slightly different model. But they got to link together. Praxis gives us a common life cycle which works at both levels. There's an automatic integration in here. And so it gives you the process model. that links as you go through, but it also gives you the underpinning knowledge. And underpinning knowledge for both of these levels and for portfolios as well. Whereas in PRINCE2 and MSP, they're subtly different about what we're talking about. Praxis will cover all of those things. You can build in the competence, capability, maturity models at both levels, whereas they may be slightly different. And of course, you can then start to put it to a much wider range of contexts. You can see what's going on. It says a greater knowledge of underlying principles is required for Praxis. We need to understand the knowledge elements and how they might be applied in different circumstances with different degrees of complexity. And so the idea of a scalable model, which PRINCE2 talks about, links into Praxis automatically. This is about understanding the degree of complexity and therefore where do we sit in this model, in this integrated model as we go through. But if your organization wants a process model, a life cycle, it doesn't have one of its own, Praxis provides a common life cycle which people understand at both levels because it uses the same language rather than different terms, rather than a different way of talking about it. If we compare Praxis to the APM and to the Project Management Institute, both the APM and the PMI actually have a body of knowledge, the body of knowledge and the PMBOK. And they're essentially summaries of the sorts of things that project managers need to know. Praxis has the same thing, but tries to link, if you like, the subject areas you're trying to manage and the kind of control systems you're trying to put in place. And so they're trying to link all of those. Rather than being separate subjects of projects, programs, and portfolios, it's in there, but reflects the different degree of knowledge, the different use of these things, and all of those areas. And so it does that integration for you. So in lots of ways, it starts to signpost for you as somebody looking at your own development, your own knowledge. Well, if I know this, if I move up, that's adding in some program level knowledge which might assist me and actually might help me the next steps into, do I move into program management rather than stay here in project management? So you start to see the links that you have in your raw skill. What do I need to develop if I want to move forward? And that starts to link into the kind of competence model that it has. It's able to see where do I go, what skills do I need to develop. If I carry out some kind of assessment of my own, does it identify the areas I need to fill in to move up to the next level? And so you can start to use it for that kind of model. It's written to combine all of those elements as we go through. And so the most common question that comes out of this is, well, who's this aimed at? Who's going to use Praxis? And my simple, glib answer is, well, of course, anyone. If you work in a project world and you want to think about moving into kind of portfolio or program or portfolio management, well, why not have a system that does that link for you? Why not have something that integrates those levels and allows you to move from one layer of complexity to the next as I go through? Which I guess is the first group there. People with a project management qualification who want a grounding in programs and portfolio. If you're new to all of this, starting in a project level within Praxis, by way of getting an understanding of programs and portfolios, gives you that broader context of where does my project fit in this much bigger world of P3 that's going on, and therefore allows you to start in projects with that kind of broader knowledge, with that gateway access into what's going on. And so, if you have a program qualification, but you want a portfolio management and actually build up some of the skills at project level, because at programs you're kind of more reporting on those, does it allow you to add those skills in so that you could drop in and out of projects, understand more what's being done at a lower level, be able to assure better at a lower level what's going on? As an organization, do you have a model for projects, programs, and portfolios? Do you have an integrated way of running these things? If you've built a project method, does it easily correspond to a program one? Can you add that in very easily? Would it be easier to use something like Praxis where it's actually got that built in for you? And you can move people from projects to programs, and the language and the life cycle is very similar. It's just a more complex solution piece of work that you're going to do. And of course, it could be that you just want to dip into bits of this. The framework is designed and is an online accessible kind of forum world that you can dip in, have a look at things, do some research, ask some questions. There are articles by lots of people in there about what's going on for it, and therefore help you think about what do I need to do next? What sort of things can our organisation do? And this is kind of looking almost kind of the personal level. Does it help you develop? Is this a pathway into charter status with the APM? And yes, Praxis is recognised for those sort of things. As qualifications, does it help you in terms of building blocks to move into that kind of arena? If you've already got qualifications in all of those things, do they integrate well? Would it be better to have a single framework that you could then go, let's build on my current knowledge from all these different areas into one place? In the models for projects, programs, and portfolios are often been written by different people, and therefore might have some subtle differences which don't integrate particularly well. Would Praxis provide that overarching framework? You have to slot all that knowledge into place as you go through. So that kind of tries to answer that particular question. So what is there? What can I do? Well, generally, there are 3 courses that you could do. If you've got no knowledge at all, starting point, foundation. What is Praxis? What is the Praxis framework? Where do I start from? And it's aimed at looking particularly at the knowledge and method elements. That's where it's going. It's looking at those kind of, and then you can build practitioner on there, which is, if you hold the Praxis foundation, how do I apply it? So the foundation is about building the knowledge, and the practitioner is then about applying that knowledge. Now, if you hold another valid project management qualification, you want to look at something else. There is a bridging qualification. Currently, that only seems to be available for classroom delivery, but that's aimed at filling in those gaps, consolidating the language. But again, that's delivered as a practitioner exam, so it's about application. So it assumes a lot of that knowledge. It might refresh some of that knowledge, open a few other avenues, other things to consider. But it's about bridging you from whatever other qualification you've got into Praxis. More details available on the website shown on here as you go through it. Oh, I think I just popped out there. I think my internet just went off. Hopefully I'm back with you all. You didn't lose too much. So again, if you want to have a look at any of those training courses, have a look on our website, ilexgroup.com/UK/training for Praxis Framework. In terms of examinations, there's basically 2. There's the foundation and the practitioner. The foundation is a knowledge test, 75 questions, 1 hour, 50%, so 38, 75. And it tests your knowledge and understanding. So do you remember what Praxis is all about? Do you understand what Praxis is telling you? The practitioner and bridging exercise is an objective test exam. For those of you who've done these sorts of things before, there may be simple multiple choice questions, there may be multiple response questions. You may be asked to select from a certain range of answers. You may be looking at assertion reason questions, which is about evaluating the use of Praxis in given circumstances. So it uses a scenario, being asked to apply in Praxis to that scenario. 2.5 hours, 80 questions, 50% pass mark, so 40 out of 80, to cover the broad range of things that are in Praxis. Which is all the things I kind of wanted to say about Praxis. I'm sure I could have said a lot more and dived into a lot more as I went on. But that brings us to that point in the afternoon where if there are any questions, please ask away.
We've not had any questions sent through yet, Andy, so we'll just give it a couple of minutes. If anyone does have any questions, just pop them in the question box. Should be along the top bar for you. And then we can work through those.
Thank
not
you,
a
Michael.
question. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael.
For everyone that can't see the questions, Michael's just said it was a great presentation. So thanks for that, Michael. Glad you enjoyed it. Anyone else have any questions? David asked, when did Praxis first come in, Andy?
So Praxis was first developed, if I get this right, it was first launched in 2017. I'd have to go and look at I have an old-fashioned book of Praxis when it was first published. It's available online now, and that's probably the better place to go and have a look at it, is the praxisframework.org. It's on there, but it's about 2017. I think Adrian had been working on it for quite some time beforehand, but that's the kind of time I remember taking the exam when it was first launched, back in that time scale. Okay. And I guess the important thing is it's although it's launched in 2017, because it's trying to compete with things that are existing in there, and I guess its profile isn't as high as it might be. If you're on LinkedIn, Adrian Dooley, who is the author of Praxis, does a lot of little clips, notes about various things from this subject. Often generate quite a good little discussion on them. So it's always worthwhile talking to Adrian on LinkedIn and seeing what's being talked about this week. Are there any particular industry sectors adopting the Praxis framework? That's difficult to say, Michael. It would be organisationally focused that you generally see those sorts of things. So it very much it'll be organisations rather than a particular industry. It can be adapted to any particular industry, and it is again about how you deliver the things you're going to go and do. So you can apply the framework to almost anything, whether it's IT or construction, and it is just about what happens in that delivery phase. I don't think there's any particular groups have gone for it. Would you say that?
Yeah,
From
Charlotte's
Charlotte?
just asked, would you say having a certification that covers a project manager in any project management environment is beneficial in today's VUCA world?
Interestingly, Charlotte, if you have qualifications that in project management, if you go for project management jobs, they're often a door opener, is the reality of this. They are proof that you have a base knowledge of A, the subject matter, and B, often a life cycle. After that, people, when they're recruiting people doing project management, they often look at your experience. Clearly, the more successful you've been, the better it looks. But having some kind of qualifications, like in most of these things, when they're looking at CVs and they've lots of things to look at, what they look for is a kind of, have you got some qualifications to back up your experience in the first place? Do you have some theoretical underpinnings? And often, if you're looking at ongoing professional development, having some of those theoretical underpinnings is a powerful starting point. Hopefully that's answered your question.
Anybody have any additional questions they wanted to ask? We'll give it another couple of minutes just in case. Oh, just had another one coming in. How would you compare P3M3 to Praxis?
So the P3M3 maturity model is designed to do projects, programs, and portfolios, as the Praxis one does. So they are kind of covering the similar sort of ground. With P3M3, often what you're looking at is different models as the starting point. So, are you using PRINCE2, MSP, and management portfolios? And how are you integrating those will be part of that kind of conversation. This would give you that integrated structure that allows you to understand what's going on. And therefore, if you build on those, you probably find that there's a probably greater understanding of the organization. They aren't learning different things at different levels. It's the same methods being expanded, the complexities you go through. So you will find that they cover the same sort of thing. Offers a route to CHV would be so yeah, that's my answer there for David. Charlotte's one, certification that offers a route to charter status would be of great benefit. Yes, simply Charlotte, if you can show your baseline knowledge, and clearly charter status is through the APM, they do recognise Praxis and the Praxis qualifications as being some of those baseline knowledge to help you move forward into future qualifications. So it would show that broad depth of knowledge that allows you to kind of move into that route.
Okay. I believe that's all the questions for now, but since we've had them coming in quite quickly, I'll just give it another minute or so just in case anyone's got any additional questions. And then we'll be finished a little bit early, so we'll give you guys back about 15 minutes of your time, of your day.
Yeah, must have talked way too quick.
No, I think it was all good. I think that looks like all the questions. If anyone does have any follow-up questions, obviously feel free to please get in touch with us at ILX. You can email us at contact us at ilxgroup.com, or drop us a message on any of our sort of social channels, and we'll be able to get back to you that way. Ooh, we may have had one more question come in. Oh,
That's just
thank
you.
you.
There you go. If you want details, clearly on our website, ilxgroup.com. All this is training on there, particularly Praxis on there if you want to go through. Connect us through the social media. But also praxisframework.org is the actual Praxis website. Interestingly, for those of you who do want to take the practitioner, then you can actually use that website as part of your exam. It's an open book, and that's the book you can open, which I think is a fantastic idea, in that you can actually go online and find information quite quickly to help you answer the exam. It's not an old-fashioned book.
Yeah, very useful. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. And that's the end of the session. So enjoy the rest of your day, and please join any other future webinars that we happen to do. Thanks, Andy. And we'll see you soon.